Good afternoon, everyone. This is a clip where I will say something about infantilism and infantility as a source of various kinds of pathology, including individual pathology, especially personality disorders, but also including some brief or longer-term ventures into psychosis, and on the other hand, social pathology, group pathology in terms of institutions, political life, ways of exercising political power, and other forms of political activity and institutional participation in the articulation of power in society. There's a very influential stream in current debate, not only the YouTube debate, but also academic debate in scholarly journals and universities, which suggests that narcissism is the problem, the psychological problem of our civilization, of our time, and that addressing narcissism, albeit difficult, because narcissism is becoming a social norm and a new normal in many Western societies, consumer societies, addressing narcissism would then be seen as going a long way towards addressing the causes and issues of psychopathology in general. What I want to say here is that narcissism is undoubtedly a major factor contributing to the dissipation of traditional rules and traditional structures within the modern society. And thus narcissism indeed is one of the main challenges to modern civilization. But there's an element of narcissism which explains a large amount of narcissism and which is at the same time a constitutive element of all kinds of other psychological disorders, and that is infantility and infantilism. It is often said that a narcissist acts as though they are a 4-year-old child. That the application of child psychology to narcissists might yield good results because the narcissist does not behave as a grown-up. They don't behave as adults. Now, why is that? The assumption is that there's an underlying disorder, an underlying issue in narcissism, and that is infantilism. Now, infantilism is what accounts for the tantrums that grown-ups exhibit when they demonstrate in the streets, the unbalanced behavior of many woke activists and modern radical feminists who take it upon themselves to call for the arrest of people who have not been accused or let alone convicted of any crime. They take it upon themselves to assault people physically in the streets, to break basic rules of social decency by going out and screaming and putting up performances of screaming and damaging property and stalling traffic and things like that. These are tantrums. These are typical behaviors for small children, for children up to the age of 4 or 5. So infantilism seems to be acknowledged as a fundamental aspect of narcissism, and at the same time it is insufficiently studied. Now, if you look at narcissism as it exhibits itself in all kinds of social relationships, if you look at narcissism in terms of infantilism, which presents itself as narcissism in many social interactions, you basically see that the way we perceive the narcissistic personality disorder is largely the same as the way we perceive immaturity as a psychological problem. Because for any adult person, for any grown-up and well-formed and well-socialized person, it would be possible to act as though they were a narcissist. It would be possible to act as though they were a borderline, for example, borderline personality disorder. Not because they are particularly talented actors, but because these disorders are in fact infantilism and its various instantiations. And this means that every grown-up can act as though they were a child because they know what it is to be a child, and perhaps they have children or they have contact with children. So it's not too difficult to behave as though you have that kind of disorder, which means that this is not a sui generis mental disorder, that these kinds of cluster B disorders, especially the narcissistic personality disorder and the borderline personality disorder, are in fact formalized articulations as diagnosis, the formalized articulations of the various aspects of infantility. So infantility is in fact the generic aspect of psychopathology in much of the Western modern culture. If this is transposed to the level of behavior of groups and political communities, societies, one sees that the actions that are insufficiently legitimate, the actions that mark the current political scenery, the dictatorship which basically hides beneath a democratic guise, behavior which is authoritarian, which is unaccountable, which is whimsy, which is hysterical, which is basically based on a fundamental desire of a single person or a group of privileged persons to maintain their positions of influence and to maintain their privilege in order to be able to continue to behave as though they were children. Group interactions, political interactions, actions in political capacity in many Western societies today basically reflect the fundamental pathology of infantility and infantilism as a disorder. If infantility is a feature, as a characteristic, is a description of someone's behavior, then infantilism would be a diagnosis, a disorder. Politicians who act in a whimsy way, who make decisions without sufficient political legitimacy, who take authoritarian actions and make decisions which lead to, for example, the mass incarceration of the entire populations, as was the case under the COVID pandemic. Politicians who believe that installing cameras on every corner and everywhere and basically illegitimately taping everyone in the street, in the public space, who install cameras in pubs and cafes, or allow the installment of such cameras, where basically any kind of privacy which people have used to enjoy in their times of relaxation and socializing with friends is removed. Politicians who institute increasing surveillance policies for the internet and for telephones and for the electronic trails and identification of individuals who push for the abolition of anonymity on the internet. Politicians who push for censorship, especially combined with the woke culture and with the warlords of the new woke movement, who basically sanction free speech and sanction opinions which particular groups don't like. All of these kinds of behaviors are infantile behaviors, and they reflect the pathology of infantilism. So basically the woke culture, the extreme radical feminist culture of today, and the modern deviations to traditional democracy, the curbing of the liberal rights and the liberal prerogatives of citizens as the bearers of state sovereignty, all of these phenomena are really symptoms of infantilism. And while not all of them have the guise of narcissism, because some of their proponents don't appear narcissistic, they do reflect the infantilism which is the core of most of the modern psychopathology, except perhaps for the particularly clear-cut psychosis which have their own etiology. Lacanian psychoanalysis is particularly useful here because it starts from the assumption that our normalcy is based on our socialization, and that the way we perceive ourselves and others as more or less psychologically normal, more or less corresponds to the way in which we see how people should behave in a particular society, how well they are adapted to the particular society. Now, according to the Lacanians, the key orientation, the key structure, the key paradigm which directs our socialization and are growing up as normal, healthy, psychologically healthy human beings is what Lacan calls the main signifier, name of the father, the role of the father as paradigmatic for the bourgeois family of Lacanian France, Lacan's time France. That figure is basically a figure of legislation within the family, of putting up requirements for the child, of socializing the child, of teaching the child what is socially acceptable, what is not, of teaching the child the virtues and the ethics of a particular community within which the child is growing up. So, according to the Lacanians, name of the father, the role of the father, the structure of authority, of hierarchy, is what makes people well structured and normal. And the destruction of that structure of authority and hierarchy of competence is basically a destruction of the very paradigm of normalcy. Once you abolish name of the father as a social role, as a paradigm, as a desirable value, a desirable function within a particular civilization, culture, you invite infantilism as a disorder to take the place of normalcy. You invite pathology to take the place of health. And you basically degrade the society into a mentally disturbed group which no longer has clear rules and clear structures, where rules are shifting and changing with changing winds and trends and desires by various groups, which may be quite minor, quantitatively speaking, in terms of the numbers of the members within a society. So, infantility seems to be the desirable value in the woke movement, and it is a defining characteristic of modern feminism, the infantility, the desire to be privileged, the desire to derive rights based on one's identity, in the same way in which a child demands attention and demands privileges within a family because it is a child, they are a child. In the same way, the radical feminists demand rights for women because they are women, not because they have done this or that or have deserved this and that, but simply because they are women. So now we have calls for the abolition of the principle of proof in criminal law, and demands, for example, that men who are accused of all kinds of wrongdoings by women should be immediately detained, simply based on the a new norm which the feminists are trying to push, and that is that the prosecution and the police should trust the women. So we should abolish the principle of a legal procedure, the principle of proof, the assumption of innocence. We should abolish all of the legal tradition and simply start, in specific cases, trusting the women whatever they say. This is an infantile claim, which is exactly the same as the claim of a child who says, okay, I am now crying because grown-ups are around me and I'm bored, and therefore you should not judge me, you should give me attention, you should hug me, you should feed me, you should put me to sleep, you should all now take care of me because I can't be guilty, I'm a child, I'm inferior. So this is basically the infantile projection, which is logically self-contradictory in modern feminism. Modern feminism, by seeking extreme privileges and major changes to the legal system and to the social rules when they apply to women, by doing so they claim the inequality of women. They basically cry out in the same way in which infantile persons, children, cry out for rules that apply to grown-ups not to be applied to them. So this is perhaps what defines the modern woke culture, and I think the woke culture has largely arisen from radical feminism as it's sort of a which initially spearheaded the whole movement of particularism as opposed to universalism, of this identity politics, which is based on the idea that particular groups based on their identity should have rights independent of the universally held rights for all human beings. And I think that this is one of the ideologies, both the woke and radical feminism, that are the source of modern pathology, and that really reflect the generic nature, the integrative view of pathology overall, and that is the growing infantility and unwillingness to accept the challenges of well-ordered society in order to prove ourselves as members of society rather than as members of particular groups.